what we're talking about today as part of the UN Food Systems Summit is actually the role of clean energy and agricultural productivity. In fact, what we really want to focus on today are game-changing ideas. So for that, I'm happy to welcome an incredible group of panelists this morning, along with nearly 800 participants who have signed up to join this dialogue today. So we'll cover a little bit of housekeeping just off the bat, and then we'll quickly get into the content. First of all, I want to thank very much our co-conveners, the Global Alliance for the Climate Smart Agriculture, the Malibu Montpelier panel, and of course the Rockefeller Foundation. I'd also like to very much thank the Dune Foundation and Good Energies for helping to make this dialogue possible. My name is Christina Skierka. I'm the CEO of Power for All, and I'll be the facilitator today. From a housekeeping perspective, panelists, please mute yourselves when not speaking, and be sure your video and audio are turned on when you are speaking. For participants, we've actually set a record today, as I mentioned, and because of this incredible number and this great interest, we are going to ask you to engage with questions through the Q&A. So please enter your questions there, and the Power for All team will be trying to aggregate those for the short time of Q&A we have at the end of our discussion. If I could see the next slide, just to let everybody know about the socials. Please feel free, post vigorously and often. We are really excited to be seeing this much interest in this topic, and we hope that you'll help spread the word and get the information out about today's incredible webinar. So with that, if I could pass it over to Mr. James Lomax, who is with us today from UNEP, who is both a food systems and agriculture advisor, to provide some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Christina. And yeah, I think this is a fantastic opportunity, I think, for all of us to start to get into one of those subjects that is critical within the Food Systems Summit. So really, on behalf of the Special Envoy, Agnes Kalibata, I'd really like to thank you and the conveners, Christina, to really make this happen. So look, we're in this year, which in the sort of the COVID world seems to be a very busy year, because we spend our times latched on to the Zoom and the MS Teams calls. But it does give us an opportunity, if you like, to work actually much more effectively when it comes to working on the Food Systems Summit. And the summit is one of those events which, for me anyway, I think is a point of departure when it comes to food systems. And it's an opportunity for some of those sectors that are not, if you like, the obvious go-tos on food. I think, like, for example, the Power for All group, those that are working on sustainable energy, to lean in and look at how this can be applied within the framework of the summit, and also to look actually how we move forward from a Food Systems Summit point of view. I say that the summit is a moment, and I say that because it really is. We are going through this process, this very, very sort of, if you like, sort of broad process of harvesting game-changing ideas, making sure that we cover issues from nutrition through to finance, through to innovation, through to governance, through to hunger, to malnutrition, you name it, it's there, productivity, to see if we can bring it together into a way that presents for farmers, stakeholders in general, businesses, countries, etc., to see how we can create a menu of services that can be applied when it comes to new policies, when it comes to activities on the ground. So this is a real opportunity. And I think, look, the summit is not working in isolation. The summit is working also, if you like, within the framework of the work around energy this year. I think this is very important. We also, of course, have not only the Food Systems a summit in September, but also the first high-level dialogue on energy. This is the first time in 40 years. So if you like, we have this convergence of very, very important elements coming forward. And of course, part of the focus will be about building resilience of smallholder farmers and improving access to clean energy, which I think is very important, not only when it comes to food production, but also when it comes to food loss that farmers are trying to deal with, not only, of course, with the short-term consequences of climate change. So there's also an issue around climate finance, understanding that only 1.7% of all climate finance goes to smallholder farmers. We need to change that. And we also want to see how that we can bring in together, if you like, this access to energy, food insecurity, but also getting farmers on and countries actually onto sustainable food systems pathways as we go. So look, this is a real opportunity we have. Last year was supposed to be the super year for nature. I think this year's the super year for nature. Because not only, Christina, do we have the summit, we have the 3 COPs that are straight after. So we have the land degradation COPs, we have the climate change COPs, and we have a new global biodiversity COP too. So a framework that will be agreed. So with all of those, plus the high-level dialogue on energy, what a perfect place and a moment to bring in the energy food nexus. So good luck to all. I'm super chuffed to be here, and thanks again, and back over to you, Christina.
Thank you so much, James. Excellent comments to warm up the audience. So before we really get into the dialogue, I do just want to take a moment and recognize that many communities are still struggling with the pandemic. And obviously our thoughts are with our colleagues, our friends and family who might be struggling. But that said, as James just explained, this topic is highly relevant, and especially when climate change is really going to be the next major, if not already is, the next major global disruption. Addressing food and energy insecurity is really critical to guaranteeing livelihoods for the most climate vulnerable communities. So with that, let me just set up very briefly while we're here, and then we'll get into the discussion and the dialogue with our panelists. Why do we need a game changer? Why is this moment so critical to build on James's points? Smallholder farmers are really at the center of a climate smart transformation for food and energy, but affordability is a massive barrier. There's an IFC Global Lighting report that talked about the potential of this marketplace, which, if you look at solar irrigation, agro-processing, and cold chains, it really is $11.3 billion. That's an amazing amount of market potential. But because of the inability to pay, the actual market is really just a fraction of that, 734 million. So that's 6% of its potential being realized. So we need game changers that are feasible, that can scale, and are sustainable over time. And that is how we will unlock the potential. So we'll hear a little bit more, if I could see in the next slide, please, a little bit more about the game-changing concept from our friends at the Rockefeller Foundation by the end of this discussion. But I just want to mention here that this Food Systems Game Changers Lab that's been set up between the Rockefeller Foundation, Food for Thought, IDEO, EAT, and other collaborators is a great support for not only this discussion, but for the overall UN Food Systems Summit. So there's a global open call, which we'll hear more about from our friends at the Rockefeller Foundation at the end of this discussion. But keep in mind, the deadline date is May 14th, and they're looking for passion, they're looking for grit, they're looking for good game-changing ideas that will really help transform the food energy nexus. Just two more bit of adverts on the next slide. We just wanted to mention that coming up in June, we are going to be working on a call to action. And that's going to be on June 27th to really call attention between the importance of SDG 2, 7, and 6 for all of those SDG fanatics out there, and really try to put forth a concise set of actions for both the high-level energy dialogue going on at the UN as well as the COP. Briefly, in the next slide, I just want to give a little plug to the Power for All podcast. Today, we actually have started and launched a special series on the energy systems combined with agricultural systems. Be great content for those who would like to know more. So please tune it in, sorry. You can find it wherever you find your podcasts. And then lastly, just to really kind of get our discussion going on the next slide, I really wanted to talk about the key filters that we're looking for today. Our real objective of the dialogue is to identify some game-changing ideas that will really help put the world's 500 million smallholder farmers at the center of really trying to accelerate their ability to feed our coming 10 billion population. And so what we're looking for today, and there'll be some opportunities both in the Q&A and some feedback later, to get into what really fits into these filters. So those filters and the way that we want to assess what is a good game changer is that there's ability to impact at scale. It's something that's actionable, it's something that's sustainable, and it's something that's integrated. And by that, what we mean is really holistic. We have to remember there's a whole ecosystem here involved in transforming the food access system. And it's not just irrigation that's going to solve the problem. So briefly, let me just hit on our agenda. We're well into our opening remarks. We're going to quickly get into discussion and focus on three basic areas. And really get into the tech and business models, financial innovations, and some game-changing ideas also around policy and data. Briefly, Ashna, if we could just pull up the slide just so people know who the speakers are, so they get that connection between name and face. This is just a brief look at this incredible group we have today. And now I think it's time to just really get into our discussion. So with that, I'd like to start off by introducing a farmer from India who's joined us today to really talk about his experience, Prince Kamboj. So Prince, if I could turn it over to you for some opening remarks, and then we'll get into some further dialogue.
Hello everyone, I am a Prince Kamboj, the Director of Dharamveer Food Processing Technology Private Limited. Basically, I am a farmer and my father Kisan Dharamveer is a grassroots innovator in the field of farming and has been awarded twist by the Prime Minister of India. My family has been farming for generations in Damna village in Haryana. In Haryana, my father wanted to move away from that traditional farming. He started growing medicinal plants like aloe vera, tulsi, amla, and kalme, etc. But there was the problem. My father was growing a medicinal plant, but he was not processing and not selling in local market. Okay, and after there was no way to process the yield into useful product. He needed a machine. I was in the 9th grade at the time. My father told me to bring some of my school supplies, and we designed the first prototype of machine. We took this design to local steel manufacturer in our village, who helped us build the first multi-purpose food processing machine. The machine can process herbs, flower, vegetables, and fruits, and spices, and mango juice, chutney, jam, herbs, extract, essential oil, aromatic oil, cosmetic products like skin gel, shampoo, hand sanitizer, hand wash. This machine is very good option for income and employment generation opportunities for self-help groups, rural and tribal peoples. Processing the fruit and selling value-added products. Our machine gained traction when we presented in the different trade fairs. In 2012, my father opened a machine manufacture unit at our farm, and we have delivered more than 1100 plus machine nationally and many African countries like Kenya, Nairobi, Uganda, Ethiopia, and one machine I was in any Delhi exhibition. One machine that time is Robert Mugabe, president of Zimbabwe. One machine he was carrying in Delhi to Zimbabwe one time. This machine operate for a DC motor, use solar to power to DC battery, and all the farmer take of solar run their technology. I have also provide local and internationally farmer and self-help group this machine use, and I have provided the training of how to make product.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Prince. Those are wonderful comments, and it's so great to hear about the use of solar in India for farmers. It's been great to have you this morning.
This is my machine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Well, just to build on the idea of what solar can do to help transform agricultural processing, as well as other parts of the value chain, I'd like to now turn to Shilp Verma from the International Water Management Institute. And as I understand it, solar irrigation is obviously something that's probably had the greatest adoption of many of the technologies for the food system. And pumping water for irrigation is responsible for 6 to 8% of annual emissions in India. But just as it's had the greatest traction with programs such as Kusum in India, there's still plenty of room to scale. So I'm wondering if, Shilp, you can tell us what you're working on and other great ideas that have come out of the International Water Management Institute, and something that could really be a game changer. And just before your remarks, if I could remind speakers to please mute when you're not speaking, and to try to keep your remarks to 3 minutes so we can really get into a dialogue. Thank you so much, Shilp.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned solar irrigation in India has shot up very significantly. We've gone from a handful of solar pumps maybe less than 10 years ago to nearly 300,000 today. And partly this is also because India is the world's largest user of groundwater. India pumps about 250 to 300 cubic kilometers of groundwater every year, using 20 to 25 million wells and tube wells. And all of these are energized. About 15, 16 million of them are electric. Now, if we could overnight just solarize all the irrigation pumps in the country, that itself would be about 130 gigawatts, which is more than the target or the very ambitious target set by the government of India. So there is huge potential of solarizing irrigation. And from the energy side, just converting all those dirty pumps or dirty energy pumps with clean energy is a revolutionary idea in itself. But EME was primarily interested in looking at solar from the water side. All of these 20 million wells and tube wells, when they pump groundwater, many of them, the farmers get the electricity for pumping groundwater free or at highly subsidized prices. And that often encourages overuse and inefficient use of groundwater. What we found was that with solar, this kind of behavior might get even more, multiplied even more. Because once you've installed the solar panels, the energy cost is zero. You get free power and very high quality daytime power. So we wanted to develop a business model which would also be groundwater benign. So what we did in one village with a few handful of farmers in Gujarat, in Western India, is we gave these farmers solar pumps, but we also connected them through a microgrid to the main grid, to the main electricity grid. And we organized these farmers into a cooperative, and the cooperative got into a 25-year power purchase agreement with the local electricity utility. So now the farmers had a choice. They could use all the energy that they were generating to pump groundwater, or they could use some of it to evacuate it back to the grid and earn some money out of it. And what we found in this experiment is that the farmers end up using only 1/3 of the power that they're generating for irrigation. 2/3 is evacuated back to the grid, and that gives them directly an additional source of income. Now, imagine if all the off-grid solar pumps were also to be connected to a grid, then a lot of the energy which should have been used for wasteful pumping of groundwater can be put back into the grid. Now, we did this experiment with a bunch of small experiment, but the government of Gujarat has now scaled it up to more than 4,000 farmers. And it is also now part of the national policy called Kusum, which plans to solarize 3 to 5 million irrigation pumps over the next few years. I'm happy to take questions on this for more details.
Oh, that's fantastic. And what a brilliant way to start off this discussion. And obviously irrigation, as we said, is just one piece of it. And processing can both be a value add and a massive source of emissions as well. So looking at how do we add value without really harming the environment. And certainly as we talk about processing, moving from irrigation in rural communities, agro-processing like milling often relies on diesel, and that can be responsible for tons of emissions for years. So for that topic, I really want to turn to Celine Urzamemzi from East African Power. Celine, if you could please describe the role of solar milling for farmers in developing countries, some of the countries you work in, and something about the innovations that you're working on, whether they're business model innovations or technology innovations, please.
Well, thank you, Christina. Before I talk about the EAP experience with our agro-processing technology, which we call Power Pods, I just wanted to mention that this developed project pilot was developed in partnership with Power for All through the Utility 2.0 project in Uganda. And this whole Utility 2.0 project is a coalition of several partners, including the utility women and the mini grid developers, solar home systems distributors, donors, and academics. So the project was initiated by Powerful and funded by Rockefeller Foundation. And one of the many goals of this project was to accelerate energy access and advance the productive use of energy. And this is where our Empower Pods comes in. It's a technology. It has 2 containers, with one with an electric dryer and second one sheltering the milling equipment. So the objective is, as their name indicates, is to empower the local community by stimulating the economic activity, the electric demand, and provide value-added agro-processing services that aims to enhance the livelihoods of the farmers in the area. So you may ask yourselves how just a milling business can do all this. Well, remember that I mentioned that mini grid developers, one of the partners on the utility project. So our machines will use the electricity from this solar mini grid. And EAP, as an energy developer company, realized that the new mini grid projects viability and sustainability is still a big challenge. So, and this is due to the low demand of the energy in rural areas. And considering this fact, we propose this technology of Empower Pods to be the productive use of the energy produced from the mini grid. And now we can say that we consume 30% of the maximum energy from the solar mini grid. So this makes our technology a reliable, permanent consumer of the energy, and it allows the mini grid developer to balance the financials and propose affordable tariffs for the community. Another thing that I have to mention is we decided to include in our business model is a partnership with a local miller. This is to enable knowledge transfer and community engagement. So EAP decided to work with a local miller who had an experience and to run and operate a diesel miller. But unfortunately, he went bankrupt due to the high price of the diesel. And considering that an electricity mill compared to an diesel one is cost like between 2,500 and 3,000 USD, we agreed with the miller that after our monitoring phase, a leasing agreement with EAP will start with a reasonable monthly payment for a period of 1 year. So, and
That's
also
great.
the fact that we work with the local team coming from the same local community. It has been serving the farmers for a long period. It helps to build a strong relationship with the community and sensitize them to trust and use our technology. Lastly, EAP plans to train the operators of the machines on energy efficiency. That will be steering of the electricity consumption, how to space the consumption if during the peak hours, or the load shedding to avoid to consume more than our limit. So in addition to that, and to finalize, we agreed to assist our local partner to develop a strategy on scaling the businesses by offering more than just milling and drying services. The idea is the miller to buy directly the maize from the farmers, and then, of course, with an interesting price to help them increase their income, and then he will sell the produced flour to the big consumers like schools, as we trust that the flour coming from ports will be of a high quality. So I think this responds to questions.
Thank you so much, Celine. And I'm going to start thank you so much. Those were great comments. And speakers, just so you know, I'm going to start giving you notification when you've got about 30 seconds left in your comments. So what I really like, Celine, about what you just laid out was the importance of partnership and how there's probably all kinds of innovation there around how different kinds of energy companies and farmers and people in the food value chain can work together. And so on that value chain, obviously post-harvest comes next. And I think we've learned a lot in the last year, especially with the advent of COVID, about how important cold chain is. As I understand it, about 40% of food loss occurs after harvest in the supply chain. And this translates to something like $310 billion of food waste annually. And that's largely because of the problems with refrigeration. So Toby, I'm going to turn to you next, if I could, to talk a little bit about what you're seeing or tracking at the Africa Center for Excellence in Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain, and specifically, what might you be seeing that has the potential to be a game changer?
Thank you. So yeah, cold chain, I think the first thing is it's not simply the provision of cold storage. Cold chain is an integrated network of pre-cooling, controlled temperature pack houses, vehicles, distribution hubs, retail points, and they've all got to work together seamlessly to assure the safety, quantity and quality of the food while delivering it from the farm or the harbour to the consumption point across geographies and time. And there are a number of key pillars that need to be addressed simultaneously in its design, but not least, we now need to look at the issue of clean cooling, clean cold chain. So how do we mitigate demand, use the clean technologies, harness renewables and waste energy? So move away from diesel. The barriers aren't simply technology. For example, in Rwanda, 2/3 of the farmers don't have grid access. So we need distributed generation, but we also need to think about thermal to thermal solutions, not just electricity, thinking thermally. Equally, farmer cash and credit constraints combined with lack of customer-centric business models are a key barrier to take up. Again, in Rwanda, more than 60% of farmers can't afford the cooling technology due to the high initial investment cost, the maintenance cost, the lack of business models. So what we're doing at the new Africa Center of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain, which is a multi-million-dollar collaboration between the governments of Rwanda and the UK, working with UNEPs, United for Efficiency, and a group of academics, is to look at how we can aggregate and look at this as a system, because the challenge is that given the multiple of subsectors and partners, we're not going to find the transition to energy efficient, sustainable solutions organically. So we've got to bring it together. So what we're doing is we're bringing all together, all the key partners through the chain, through the system, to create the fit for market pathways, combining technology, energy and business model to deliver net zero cold chain and cooling. And then critically, we've got living labs, which we're developing in different countries, Kenya, so on and so forth, where we can cascade out the technical assistance and the knowledge transfer and the business model, and also provide the capacity building for delivery. So from my perspective, the key thing is with cold chain is that we have to move from thinking about siloed pieces like cold storage. We have to understand it's a chain. And equally, we have to understand it's not just about technology, it's about technology, energy resources, and business models.
Excellent comments. Thanks so much, Toby. And I really love what you were talking about, to really think about an entire systems change approach. I think that's great fodder for the conversation today. So Rafaela, if I could ask you to speak on behalf of the World Food Program, obviously, creating impact at scale doesn't just come from addressing one piece of the puzzle, as we've just heard from Toby, but actually taking more of an ecosystem or a community-based approach. And I know that WFP has been running school lunch programs for decades and is currently planning on targeting something like feeding 70 million students a year. And you also have a bit of an innovation there around integrating renewables into the schools themselves. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you so much, Christina. Yeah, so I sit in WFP. We work with food and nutrition, and in particular, our team tries to add the access to energy lens to the programs that WFP runs. So one of these programs, a huge one, is the school feeding. Basically, we bring food to schools. Now, the question is, how can access to energy increase the social capital that this intervention is already bringing? Energy for schools can fill a number of services. One that is very dear to us is cooking, because we deal with food. And energy for cooking, we did improved cook stoves for many years, mixed results, and really modern cooking is what we are looking at now, including electric cooking. For electric cooking, you need lots of energy. And that's what spurred the idea of having a huge installation that is needed for cooking, also looking at other uses. So another huge program of WFP is homegrown school feeding, which means that the food that we procure from producers for the schools, but also for emergencies, for fragile regions, and so forth, comes from international sources. But the aim is to make it come as much as possible from local smallholder farmers. So we have programs that just target that kind of relationship, of procuring relationship, and looks at improving the quality, the quantity of the food that is produced. So putting the two things together, we came up with Energizing School Feeding, which is about having schools as a little bit energy hubs within the community, whereby the energy is produced for the uses within the school, so the cooking, but also water pumping, refrigeration for vaccines, and so lighting, connectivity, digital learning, of course, but also for productive uses that can be assessed by the surrounding community. So basically, the school becomes the anchor client for the energy provider.
30 seconds.
While many other energy services linked to agricultural productivity can be added to the concept, making it also more sustainable.
So that I just love that idea. And to me, all of these sound like potential game changers. So I just want to do a quick lightning round, meaning I'm going to ask a question of our 4 panelists who just spoke, and you have 1 word to tell me what you think the answer is. So all of these innovations sounds great. But my question is, where are we at operation at scale? What do we need to scale these ideas? Shilp, what is the 1 word of what we need to scale these ideas?
Viable financing options.
Okay, that's 3 words, but great. Celine, back to you. What do you think?
Sorry, Christina, I lost my connection. Can you please repeat?
Oh, that's okay. Can you turn on your video real quick? One word. What do we need to scale some of these great ideas?
More investment?
Okay, financing investment. I'm seeing a theme here.
A pattern.
And then what? Yeah, sorry, Rafaela?
A pattern, yes, indeed.
Pattern, yes, indeed. So Toby, I'm sure you might want to throw your hat to the ring. What do you think is needed to get this to scale? Oh, so we can't hear you, Toby.
So I said business models, but don't forget skills and capacity.
Okay, got it. And Rafaela, anything else to add in there?
Yeah, I think for us, since we have the footprint and the possibility to replicate the exact model in many places, it would be mainly financing and the proof of concept and then financing.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Well, with that and a big theme on money, it's perfect that we now switch to a discussion around financial instruments and schemes. And our first commenter on this is actually going to be Fiona Hoffman-Harlan from the Shell Foundation. So Fiona, just to set up your comments, obviously we've heard a lot about investment, but going back to the early slides, affordability of products and technologies really can improve farmers' incomes by increasing yields and driving efficiency, but a lot of this stuff is out of reach. So asset financing is certainly something that is starting to gain more traction across the sector. And I believe you're working on some sort of 7-year program to really try to transform this marketplace. Could you characterize that for us and maybe weave together how something like that could help take some of these game-changing ideas to the next level?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Christina. So as you mentioned, there are different components in order to make productive use assets attainable. And so our 7-year program, CASE, which is funded by Shell Foundation and FCDO, looks at this from 3 main angles. So one is increasing income so that individuals are able to afford the assets. The second angle is from reducing the cost of the assets. And the third is by addressing some of the ecosystem builders. And that's where this asset financing really comes in, as well as insurance, which Kaushik, I'm sure, we'll touch on later. And just really quickly in terms of why, just to give a little bit of light into why asset financing is so important. Last year, we, along with Raffle and MasterCard and Dahlberg, conducted some research in Kenya on rural pathways. And one of the questions we asked was, what is one of the main enablers to increase productivity? And 80% of the rural households that responded said access to finance was the key enabler. So this is really critical to understand. Another thing that we're seeing is a correlation between increased access to finance and increased income levels. So back to the pathways research that we were looking at, Pathway 1 had 22% of households had access to finance, to credit, sorry. In Pathway 2, which is a little bit later stage, 36%. But yet 40 and 44% respectively are still spending this credit on inputs. So this means that there's still a huge financing gap in order to get the access to assets. Just moving on to general challenges in the asset financing space. So working capital is a repeated challenge, as we actually just heard from the 4 previous panelists in terms of access to financing. There are a couple challenges here. So both long cash conversion cycles when providing asset financing, as well as companies getting foreign debt in hard currency, but then trading in local currency, or local debt also being quite costly. Another component here, in addition to kind of the working capital piece, is working with farmers. They're inherently rural, and so developing strong business models in order to be able to actually service these farmers at lower costs is also a main challenge. To kind of the next part of your question around kind of specific models. So we're working with a couple of different models around asset financing. So kind of two main models that we're looking at right now. And I just want to say that we're constantly learning from our partners, iterating and kind of incorporating these learnings into our approach. But kind of two main approaches we're taking right now are, one is in regards to working with specific product companies. So this would be such as kind of a Systema Bio or Sun Culture to providing asset financing for their specific products. The second one is working with third-party intermediaries in order to providing financing for other product companies or products. Another couple of innovative financing components. So Agrocenta in Ghana, for example, is linking market access with credit and repayment of credit. And then another one that's an interesting innovative model is Keep It Cool, which is also providing kind of financing around and use of cold storage and cold units matched with the market access. So thank you
so much. Yeah, that's great. And it just sounds like an amazing program. And, you know, in terms of the world of financial innovations, you know, pay as you go seems to be deep in its maturity now. But early days, pay as you go was seen to really accelerate adoption of decentralized renewables. And it's made a huge difference for the marketplace and for households. But as I understand, there can sometimes be higher rates of default, especially among the group of farmers that some of this work is centering on. So I'm wondering if we might hear from Kaushik Ramakrishnan from Pula, because I know that you ran an insurance pilot to try to mitigate these risks to DRE companies. And obviously a whole theme here is how to get decentralized renewable companies working together with farmers and other parts of the agro-processing chain. So could you tell us in just around 3 minutes a little bit about that? How did the pilot work, and was it successful? And if so, can it scale?
Sure, thanks, Christina. So as you mentioned, I work for Pula, which is an agriculture insurance and technology company. And what we do is we work with smallholder farmers who, as many of the panelists have mentioned, are exposed to the risks of climate change and the costs of climate change, but have little ability to mitigate themselves. So what we do as a company is offer what we call, index-based insurance solutions to smallholder farmers, and more specifically, what we call as area yield index insurance. So we insure farmers against their yields falling below a certain level, and if it does, then they get a payout. And we have done this with, we've insured about just under 4.5 million farmers across 13 countries in the last 5 or 6 years that we've been operating. And as Fiona and others have mentioned, insurance is a channel to unlock access to credit, unlock access to finance. So as a result, we see that the insurance products get bundled in with many other credit schemes, such as schemes that a government may run, or a private sector bank may run, or an input provider or a seed company may run. But also specifically, as you mentioned, Christina, a pay-as-you-go company, which is basically pre-financing the assets that they give to farmers and then recover that over installments in the future. So we did, as you mentioned, do a pilot program. This was, of course, generously supported by the Shell Foundation. So we worked closely with Fiona and her team, as well as supported by IFAD. And we worked with a company called Vitalite in Zambia. And what they basically do is provide these solar home kits to get kind of off-grid energy in rural communities. And as you can imagine, one of their biggest customer segments is farmers in these rural communities that they work with. And they pre-finance these solar home kits for smallholder farmers. But as a result of pre-financing them, they are also now directly exposed to the risks of the farmer, right? If a farmer has a bad harvest, if there's a drought, if there's a pest infestation, then the farmer's cash flows are impacted. And as a result, the farmer is more likely to default on their payments. And the company, the paygo companies have tried to self-insure to a certain extent by adding in a 10% markup on their costs of financing and so on. But what we have seen is when there is a weather event, for instance, it is systemic in nature. It affects all farmers in a region when it happens. And when that does happen, the default rates can go as high as 35%. So the self-insurance model was both very expensive and not very effective. So what we try to do in this project is, try to work with just under 9,000, about 8,800 maize farmers in Zambia who had also received one of these solar kits on credit from Vitalite, and we designed an insurance product that would match the cash flows of the farmers, or kind of stabilize the cash flows of the farmers in the event of a poor harvest. We were also able to bring kind of the cost of the premium down from what was previously about 10% down to about between 3 and 4%. This was done for one season, so there is still work to do. But what we did learn is we need to tweak the product for sure, but there is a huge market. Less than 5% of Zambia's rural communities have access to the grid. So there's a huge market. If we can make this insurance product work and use that to significantly expand the availability of free financing, then there's definitely a lot of impact to be done here.
Thank you so much for those comments. It sounds like a really useful pilot for several applications across the value chain. In that same way, bulk procurement could potentially be something to help radically alter affordability. And I'm wondering if there's some application here. So Rajneesh Rana from EESL, I wanted to turn to you to see if you could tell us a little bit about your organization's experience working with the government of India and the ISA, creating a partnership there. Tell us a little bit about how that worked and what you think the promise is for such a model to really improve the overall global value chain for decentralized agro-processing.
Yeah, thanks, Christina, and good evening, and good afternoon, good morning to all the viewers where they are listening to this one. Very important subject topic you have chosen. First, compliment to all of you for this one, and especially for the developed country, it's a need of our also. So Energy Efficiency Services is a SPV of Ministry of Power, Government of India, and we have been entrusted the work to work in the sustainability energy efficiency sector, and we have done a number of programs in the last 7-8 years of our inception, which includes the LED revolution, not only in India, throughout the world. Then we have the street light programs, the solar pumps, and we are now into the e-mobility, the charging infrastructure for e-mobility, and the smart meter, to name the programs we are engaged into. So we are one of the entity which is basically established, where our job was to basically to take a risk and to provide the comfort to the end customer and to the suppliers. So our business model works on that one. So it's a pay as you save kind of a business model, and which works very well for many of the programs. Going forward for the solar pump, I talk about specifically, we have done a number of programs here in India where the energy efficient pumps we have started with. Inefficient pumps were replaced with the energy efficient pumps on a business model basis where the farmer need not to pay anything, and all the cost is being met through the energy saved from the energy efficient pumps, which is being monetized and being paid by the discoms. So that was a business model. Now coming to the aggregation of demand, which the Christina was talking about, definitely we have evolved with this business model, and we have found that how the cost come down when you aggregate the demand, the kind of service you can provide, the product quality you can provide to the customer. It's really helpful to the manpower or the citizen of the country. For ISA also, as approach us for this one, they have aggregated the demand from 22 countries, which largely from the African nations, some of the Asian countries, and Latin American countries. So we have done the tender for them for around 100,000 solar pumps for 22 countries, and it was a very complex exercise which we undertook. Almost 96 price components we have invited through this tender. You can make out, if those who are a little bit aware about the procurement process, the variation of the size of the pumps, then there is a rating of the pumps, then there is a different categories were there. There is some FOB basis, some on ex-factory price basis, there is some on the installation basis. So 96 components were there, and almost 6,000 price we have entries price we have received from the 5 suppliers. So we have found that yes, in the first tender itself, the prices has come down almost to 30%, which were the prevailing market price in the African market, if I take specifically the African market. And the similar exercise when we done in the India also for the government of India for the solar pumps, the similar kind of a response we have got from the benchmark price. The price discourse was quite lower. And what I feel that to scale up this business model, it has to be commercially viable, because the subsidy model can't work for a long. It's require a lot of investment. So it has to be a commercially viable model where the investment has to come, and it has to be payback over a period of time.
Excellent comments. Thank you. I mean, quite innovative, and bulk procurement is something that's been used by governments all over the world to try to accelerate adoptions and create a market transformation. So great to see that model here. And as we've heard earlier, how do we scale some of these game-changing ideas? Another element is access to credit. So credit scores can support risk assessment and could have a significant impact on the ability to scale. And so for some comments on this topic, I wanted to turn to Madeline Gleave, who's the Chief of Data Science of Nithio, to really talk a little bit about some context around how credit factors into this ability to scale, and are there some game-changing ideas you're working on at Nithio or have seen around that you think could really apply here?
Thanks so much, Christina. So as has been mentioned, we really see that in order to scale, financing is really the key. And in order to scale financing, we believe that having better insight into the actual repayment patterns and risk for these new innovative, non-traditional type of assets or non-traditional payment or financing innovations is necessary to bring in the private capital to reach scale for the sector. So Nithio is an AI-enabled energy financing platform that standardizes credit risk analysis using alternative types of data in order to then be able to scale those energy access products and climate adaptive products. So I work at the team to bring together a variety of different data sources that can be useful in reaching the type of households that might be normally unbanked or underserved by traditional types of data. So many thanks to Fiona for describing very well the kind of concepts of asset financing and pay-as-you-go models. Nithio's worked a lot with pay-as-you-go distributors in the solar sector in understanding their data needs, understanding their financing needs, and actually analyzing at a very detailed level the payment patterns of their customers. And we see that the pay-as-you-go model has been revolutionary for distributed energy, and it's even more needed for these agricultural appliances that are likely to be much higher cost. But there are some barriers to that. There's an estimated gap of 26 billion in financing necessary for African smallholder farmers. Nithio is primarily focused on African markets. And only, as has been said by James, only 1.7% of climate finance goes to those farmers. So the question is why? And it's really this lack of data on creditworthiness that is keeping more traditional private capital from feeling comfortable about investing in this space. 90% of Africans don't have a credit score from a formal credit bureau. So Nithio has been able to provide this solution with credit scoring and monitoring of portfolios of smallholder farmers or last mile households, and can help de-risk these transactions, helping catalyze that private capital into the market and achieving that impact at scale, as Christina rightly focused. So how do we do it? Nithio's risk analytics engine helps investors better understand risk by using machine learning models that are trained on actual repayments from customers, both historical and current, and geospatial data. So we work with a proprietary data set that has hundreds of different indicators around household characteristics sourced from household data, household survey data, and satellite imagery and points of interest data to provide very precise characteristics of communities or households down to a square kilometer
30
level.
seconds.
So bringing that together, we can provide predictive and highly customized credit risk scores, being inputted into due diligence processes to support investments into these companies, mini grids, or other asset financing transactions to really understand the value of a portfolio of smallholder farmer loans. And then also in monitoring of the repayment performance of existing facilities to help understand the credit risk or payment performance so distributors and investors can adapt quickly. And one final thing I think it's important to emphasize with credit risk is that we're not intending to kind of skim off the top, but really using data and insight to direct the right type of capital, whether it's commercial or concessional, to the right type of households that really need it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And data is useful not just in this application, but obviously also for governments and policy. We did a little sort of pre-event survey through our networks to ask what was the top scaling priority in terms of getting decentralized energy across the value chain for food and agriculture. Tech and data was 20% of respondents' number one choice, and business model was about 40%. But importantly, better policy frameworks, 21%. So turning now to thinking about ecosystems and policy frameworks, I wanted to really get Sam Zuby from TFE Energy and Smart Power Myanmar engaged in this discussion. I know that finding ways to triangulate energy and agriculture to work together for big transformation is everything. So Sam, I'm wondering if you could take maybe just about 3 minutes and tell us about your experience using data to find the best kinds of energy for various crops. And how can we use that information to improve both energy and ag programs? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I think you've touched on a lot of very interesting points there from the other speakers. And I think that one of the things that our access point to this conversation was really about how do you use data to broaden the analysis from productive uses on mini grids, which is something that we came from, more to the uses of energy along entire value chains. Now, the first major difference is that value chain is a massively complex thing to look at. A mini grid in its simplicity is relatively straightforward. But increasing the productivity of a mini grid is all very well and good, but in order to capture the full value, it has to be absorbed down the value chain. And so there are so many other factors that need to be considered. Things like road access, things like the ability to aggregate produce in order to keep the throughput of a machinery high enough to justify the capital expenditure of the machinery. So we have been doing quite a lot of work in Myanmar. You mentioned with Smart Power Myanmar to try and analyze, first of all, where are the geographic areas that should be prioritized. And so to do that, we've been using GIS tools, both GIS tools that indicate where the high productivity areas of certain value chains are, but also GIS tools that can map road access, the quality of the grid, overlaying nightlight imagery with maps of where the grid is to try and see which are the off-grid areas, which are the on-grid areas. Now, the idea behind this is to try and prioritize where particular interventions might have the greatest impact. Now, what we realized very quickly is different types of projects will have different types of impact. So if you're looking at impact, which is about improving the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, you're wanting to look at areas which are potentially off-grid, areas or communities which, as I say, might be clustered around other communities, so might be able to aggregate enough produce to make the investment into a piece of machinery worthwhile. However, if you're looking at more commercial projects and trying to maximize the returns on investment of a particular energy access intervention, this tends to incentivize moving further down the value chain towards perhaps more grid-connected areas or areas which might have relatively poor grid services. 30 seconds. So in Myanmar, this is a particular issue, for example. So we've been looking at how renewable energy interventions, for example, grid-tied solar and storage systems might be able to smooth energy supply and therefore keep the throughput and productivity of bigger machinery going. So that might have a greater economic impact. So it's very much about painting a picture using data to try and best prioritize investments onto these value chains.
Thanks for that, Sam. And you know, as we get into this discussion about policy and enabling environment, we are so lucky because we do have leading experts here on the call today that really can focus on unleashing the power of decentralized renewables to improve agricultural productivity and development outcomes. So Sanusi, I'm going to turn to you, who is head of the REA in Nigeria. And I know you're close to launching an energizing agricultural program to create an integrated approach to investing in the ag energy nexus. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and national policy frameworks and how important that is to the food energy situation in maybe just about 3 minutes, if you could.
Thank you very much, Christine. Sanusi here, Executive Director of Rural Electrification Fund. So I work under the Rural Electrification Agency. The fund actually is meant to support, the activities of, the agency in Nigeria. And as a government agency, our job is, to promote, provide, and coordinate all the actors within the space, to see how we can achieve our mandate. So we've realized long ago that if we wanted to achieve our policies, dual targets both in agriculture and, DRE, we needed to have some sort of integrated plans. And that's why if you notice most of our programs in REA are either called Energizing Education or Energizing Health or Energizing Agriculture, especially for agriculture. Nigeria is largely an agrarian, country. And also we have a very huge deficit when it comes to lack of energy access. So we thought it wise, to tie these two sectors together if we needed to achieve scale quickly. So what we've done is to build policies around, this integration, especially for financing as well, whereby, for instance, we design a program, like you mentioned, the Energizing Agriculture, which is something we've already started, but we're looking at scaling it up, to ensure that there is a deliberate attempt by government to solve these challenges together. So what we've noticed is that for mini grids, which we have a lot of potential for, and we've been deploying across the country, most of the productive use around the country is for agriculture. So you see processing, cold storage, and all of that. And in some places, you find just natural resources, agricultural resources around with few households. And it made it difficult for them to qualify under our current model, because we need to achieve a certain number of households in addition to productive use. And that is why we started to think of designing specific programs for agri-processing, using agriculture as productive use for some of these mini grids. And that's the way we need to go, because the government is not just looking at providing access to electricity, to households, but also stimulating the economy. So using energy as a catalyst, using energy as a catalyst to, promoting and enhancing the economy of rural communities. So for us in Nigeria, the government has long recognized the significance of this, and we've long started, planning this jointly, for the development of our country.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those comments. And all these tools, all these policies, business models, et cetera, are only useful if there's local entrepreneurs who are actually prepared to take advantage of them. And so for this, for our final comments before we get into some Q&A from our many hundreds of people listening in today, Karen Sagel from IFAD, I wanted to turn to you to talk a little bit about this new renewable energy strategy. And I believe it's a $20 million program to foster agripreneurs in Africa. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So very briefly, the renewable energy strategy at IFAD is you can find it on the website, is actually a different strategic document that is developed to help the country teams better integrate renewable energy along the value chains. But what I want to talk here is a little bit about the Agribusiness Hubs, which is, yes, a $20 million initiative with funding from BMZ, the Germans. And the idea is basically, I want to ask you a question. Where do most of the most amazing ideas in rural areas end up? I don't have much time, so I'll answer it. They end up in a graveyard with all the many good ideas that rural entrepreneurs have, because they are dealing with those challenges. So in IFAD, which is a specialized UN agency and an IFI, we are developing these agribusiness hubs similar to the Songhai Center, which basically nurtures ideas right from the beginning. So helping the training of youth into supporting them into fully fledged innovations, whether like the first ones we met, the first speaker said, and really helping these youth entrepreneurs to market their ideas, because we see there is a big gap in after the innovations come in place, there is no really support to help the rural youth market technologies. So this project is starting in Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria, Mozambique, and Cameroon. And the idea is really to nurture innovations in the renewable energy ag sector and help develop businesses around that, and really attract back the youth into agriculture, which is a big challenge that we have, which we're facing.
Great.
I've been good.
You've been excellent. I didn't even have to give you a warning. So thank you for that. So we now have a whole bunch of questions, and we're trying to group things together, and I'll do my best to sort of ferret these out to the team on the call to see who might be most appropriate to answer them. But what I'd like to start off with is actually a pretty broad ranging question. And this comes from Mira Shah from the Imperial College of London. Thank you for your question. How can policymakers drive a holistic upgrading of energy access across national food systems? What countries already have a comprehensive overview and approach to improving energy access for ag? So I think we heard some great things going on in Nigeria. I think I might actually toss this question back to some of our beginning speakers to talk about your experience about what's been great about working in which countries. So maybe even Rafaela from the World Food Program, could you maybe respond to this?
Thank you, Christina. Well, for the particular project I was talking about, we are in a fairly good position because obviously education is an institutional service, and so we always work hand in hand with the Ministry of Education. The peculiarity of our program requires us to put in touch the Ministry of Education with the Ministry of Energy, which you know, is one of the challenges that we face within organizations and within systems all over the place, so that we tend to work in silos. So that is perhaps one of the things that will make the integrated approach that we are envisaging easier to implement if we could talk across sectors.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the next question is actually specifically for Celine, but I'm also going to ask you to build on that response. Since you work as EAP in a number of different countries in Africa, where have you observed that kind of comprehensive overview to really help grow the sector? Question for you, but in addition, Masuo Nguni, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, wanted to know how you create more productive use demand. So if you don't mind answering both those questions, that would be great. Celine, are you there? Okay, maybe not Celine then. Who else could we throw this question to? I think actually, Sanusi, since you are so engaged in policy and you know so many of your colleagues around the world, I'm wondering, and because so many people probably ask Nigeria about how have you done this and how can we copy your program design, I'm curious what other countries you think are also doing a good job on this front. Okay, for some reason we seem to have lost comments. Great, why don't I move on to the next question, since we seem to be having some sort of technical problem. Question for the panel, Agri-PV, solar with crops underneath. What future does the panel think of this? Solar with crops underneath. I don't know, Sam, maybe you have a point of view or somebody else who's a little bit closer to some innovative ideas? Hello?
Yeah, if allow me, I can give the answer if it's time. Rajneesh, this side.
Thank you, Rajneesh. I appreciate it. I'm not quite sure what's going on technologically here, but we're across so many different countries, it could be anything. So please, Rajneesh.
So I think it's a good idea, and a lot of work is going on in India also about this one. And but the main thing is, again, if we see is come back is on the costing part, that how viable the solution is there, because if you raise the structure up to a certain height, then it remains, it costs a lot, and the investment is required, and the poor farmer doesn't have that kind of investment. But if somebody can afford that one, naturally it's a very good proposition, because there are, as one of the case study you have presented, you can come up with the crops which are cash crops, you can say, and it can sell like a hot cake. But it's all about the investment. For that, you require a cheap financing and a lot of designing for that part.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I'll also, Sam,
thanks, Sam.
Energy, just to add a point to that, is that it raises a very interesting question of function stacking. And this we've seen time and time again is always a good thing to be looking at. If you could be stacking multiple functions on the same technology or the same use of space, you're going to be benefiting. So from a value chain perspective, one way of looking at that is to use machinery which can perform multiple tasks. So for example, drying multiple different crops. So putting crops underneath solar panels is an elegant example of function stacking, and it's all about that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sam. We have a question now specifically for Kaushik. Do any of the organizations that Pula provides portfolio de-risking insurance products, have they been able to reduce their cost of capital with lenders? The further question is, the insurance for smallholder farmers sounds very promising. Does Pula cover production-related issues only, or also protect farmers against demand-side instabilities?
Sure, I had answered those on the chat, but I'll mention it again.
Thank you.
So the first question was reducing the overall cost of capital. We definitely see that there is increased access to capital, which comes as a result of transferring the risk away from the farmers, and as a result, de-risking, away from the whole portfolio. We are also seeing evidence of lower cost of capital, but this does take time to realize. Once you've insured your portfolio for 2 or 3 seasons, that's when you realize kind of the long-term benefits of insurance, and then you start to see that there is a possibility to negotiate lower, get capital at lower rates. And that's something we're starting to see evidence of, and that's something we definitely want to dig into, because that's ultimately the big business case for insurance. And the second question was if we cover only production risks, or does it also cover demand side risks? And if I remember correctly, there was also a mention about COVID-19.
Exactly.
What we cover is the yield of the farmer, and the yield of the farmer is impacted by weather, by pests, and by many issues, but primarily production issues. But what we have seen is, especially during the peak of the lockdowns and so on that happened last year, there was also yield impact as a result of lockdowns and a farmer not being able to plant at the right time or not able to take care of their fields, which had an impact at the end of the season, and that was to a certain extent covered. But real demand side issues in terms of market pricing and so on, we don't cover at the moment. It is still mostly based on production issues, but measured as a factor of yield, which is closely correlated to the farmer's income ultimately.
All right, that's great. Thanks so much for those comments. Next question is around subsidies and tax. Some questions around increasing the tax of dairy and meat, or migrating subsidies from fossil fuels to renewables. Are there specific actions on subsidy and tax that will lead to greater scale? This is sort of a policy question, but I imagine several people on the panel could have a point of view. Who wants to field that? Rafaela? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, perhaps since, particularly because we work with the most vulnerable, and so we do see a real role to play for vouchers that can perhaps at the beginning of the introduction of a technology, or for in some cases in a continuous way to support the most vulnerable people. And we should think about that in terms of other benefits, societal benefits that are associated with that. So the cooking, you have the health, you have the environment, you have many other costs that you are avoiding by subsidizing. So it's not necessarily to be seen as a loss of money, but maybe an investment. And so we are definitely considering a role for vouchers and subsidies in our program.
Thank you for that. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, hi. I think part of the question was also on diverting fossil fuel subsidies to renewable energy. I think this is a very, very important question that perhaps we're not lobbying more, because if I recall correctly, in 2010, $410 billion were put into the fossil fuel sector in subsidies, compared to 66 billion in renewable energy. If only half of that amount would be transferred to the renewable energy sector, then we would be able to actually compete on a level playing field. So at the moment, when people say that renewables are still have a high cost, we're not calculating the actual highly subsidized fossil fuel sector. And I think much more work has to be done on this, especially UN agencies that work with the high level ministries and of course companies like we have here, like Shell and the extractive industries. This is they're playing an important role in renewables, but at the same time, I think they should be playing an even more important role in reducing this amount on subsidies in fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else want to follow on to that?
Hi, Christina, can I add?
Yes, please do. Can you turn on your picture or your camera?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to distinguish between, I mean, there are subsidies and there are subsidies there. And in EME, we like to distinguish between smart subsidies and not so smart subsidies. There are subsidies which can actually suppress the market. But for example, in the case of solar, we've seen that in India, although there is a lot of subsidies right now, they have been gradually, the government is phasing them out. And as an impact, because the market is able to achieve scale, we are seeing that the unit costs are significantly declining. Almost every day, the cost of solar energy is going down. And I think that is a smart subsidy. That's a good way of doing that. But there are also numerous examples where subsidies actually kill the market and they restrict the total market to the size of the subsidy. So I think that rather than saying there should be more subsidies or there should be less, we need to be a bit more nuanced in our advocacy. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question, which I think will probably end up kicking over to Karen and then see who else has comments, is what workforce development is needed most? This is a question from Deborah Rose, so thanks for that question. And I'd love some comments on this, both from Karen, who's looking at it from a programmatic perspective, but maybe also for some entrepreneurs who are actually dealing with workforce and developing the right skills on the ground. So please. Oh, you're muted. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it depends also on the level of capacities of each country, right? There is not a one size fits all for this as an answer for this. But just as an example, I think in Cambodia, where I was living for 4 years, where we developed a project around renewable energy, it was much more about creating job placement and internships for master's students and university students, because still renewable energy is quite a nascent sector, but you have the capital, you have the machinery, you have the universities that offer agriculture engineering courses, which could be easily linked up with energy. So I think it's very important to work with the new generation of youth, which are not only academic, but also having practical hands-on placements. So I think building that last year student placements into the sector is very important. Contrarily, if we were working in Rwanda, it's much more about bringing back the youth into agriculture. So really having things like, as I mentioned before, like the Songhai Center, which are centers that offer practical hands-on, but with satellite hubs, which are specific to those sectors. So if you're working in the dairy value chain, you're actually going and seeing how they're processing yogurt, milks, etc., through use of renewables, and building their capital, their human capital there. So it's a question that is very difficult to answer with just one answer, but I think it depends on also looking at the labor force. The percentage of labor force in agriculture is a huge starting point, because as countries develop, you see a shrinking labor force in the agriculture sector. So yeah, stop there.
Thank you so much. Anybody else want to comment on workforce development? We are nearing the end of time, so we have time for literally one more question. So let me just pull one out of the pile, and then we'll move to some closing remarks from the Rockefeller Foundation and kind of wrap up all these great game-changing ideas. Question is, can we look at battery as a service for access to power for farmers on PAYGO? This is from Anthony Osibajo. I apologize if I'm butchering your name, but thank you for the question. Who would like to respond on this concept of battery as a service?
I'll respond.
Sam, go for it.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very interesting concept. And I think it also touches on the idea of scale. So it depends what kind of scale you're looking at, because arguably a micro utility model whereby an independent power producer is selling kilowatt hours to, for example, a factory, can also be seen as batteries as a service. Obviously, that model depends hugely on regulation. But again, using Myanmar as an example, any country which has relatively poor grid quality, particularly in the sort of peri-urban areas, battery as a service is actually a really, really good model. We've seen a similar thing in Nigeria with the undergrid mini-grids, where essentially storage and batteries are used to store grid power when it's available, which obviously brings the cost of that down, and deliver it to customers when it's not available. Now, if your off-taker is an industrial processor or an agricultural processor, where that throughput has a big effect on their business case, that can be a hugely valuable and very commercial investment opportunity, and in that sense doesn't necessarily need any subsidies at all. It stands up on its own. So battery as a service, particularly at the bigger scale, particularly at the grid edge in undergrid scenarios, is an excellent business case.
Thank you so much for that. With just 5 minutes left until the end, I'm going to ask for some final comments from Chianda Nyogu at the Rockefeller Foundation, just to remind us a little bit about the Game Changers initiative and maybe any observations you have in just maybe 3 minutes, if you could.
Thanks, Christina. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gian Njogu, and I work at the Rockefeller Foundation's Food Initiative based out of our Africa Regional Office in Nairobi. And I'm also part of a cross-initiative at the foundation that focuses on active use / energy, ending energy poverty. How exciting and inspiring this dialogue session has been for me. I'd like to thank the organizers, the innovation presenters, and all the attendants from various organizations globally. We truly value the thoughts and insights and questions that have been brought to the table. And it's quite clear from this session that the role for...
Now we're having some trouble with Chianda's internet, unfortunately. Let's see if he might join back in. Oh, Chianda, you're back? Chianda, unfortunately, we're having some problems with your internet. Are you able to, yeah, please try again.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Most interesting of timings there. Yeah, so I was just mentioning that it's pretty clear from this session that the need to combine all the different efforts towards transforming agriculture through renewable energy needs to happen so that we can create permanent solutions at this ag and energy nexus front. And so a couple of salient issues were brought to the front that stood out. I think the first one that I thought came out quite strongly was around community engagement. So thinking about how we really engage with the communities that are bringing power to. It's not just about bringing the different DRE solutions and then expecting that they'll be taken up as that they'll be taken up without any further sensitization or local capacity building. So this goes a long way to create permanent solutions, and it's something that we're really thinking about at the foundation. And the other important point was around systems change, thinking, or integration. So I really liked the points around bringing together technology, energy, and innovative business models. And then to add a fourth one, I think different types of partners. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it's something that's important at the foundation. Game Changers systems, the Food Systems Game Changers Lab, which is a program that offers everyone a listening way to join to co-develop solutions at the ag energy space. So building partnerships will be a core focus of this platform. So and we are calling for applications, and I'll just reshare the link for this. That's due. Submissions are due by May 14th. So we're calling each and every one that has exciting innovations in this space to join us in this movement forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent sort of roundup of some of the key takeaways from today. So when we started out an hour and a half ago, we really set out one objective, which was to start identifying some game-changing ideas that can really put the smallholder farmers at the center of feeding a global population that will quickly be to 10 billion. You know, we had some filters around ideas that can impact at scale, sustainability, so an emphasis on renewable energy as a resource, but also the chance to action and something that's integrated and holistic. I think today with this incredible group of panelists with some great questions from around the world, we have accomplished that objective. And I hope everybody's walking away from today really feeling uplifted with the ideas and the opportunity that are in front of us. Speaking of which, this is the year of the United Nations' first ever UN Food Systems Summit in its entire history. So Power for All, on behalf of everyone on this call, will be sending a feedback form to the summit. We would also ask anyone who feels particularly inspired and wants to be part of an effort to call for more attention to really integrate decentralized renewables and agriculture to participate in our call to action. You can sign up at the link here, which I believe has also been pasted in the chat. As we've just heard from Chianda, it's a great time to enter submissions for any game-changing ideas for the Game Changers Lab. And again, just a little nudge to think about subscribing to the Power for All Food Energy podcast series for those of you who want to learn more. We've got an incredible lineup over the next few weeks. And then just stay tuned. You can follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, etc. You also can sign up for our newsletter, if not already, on our website at powerforall.org. So stay tuned for more focused dialogues on business models, and let's work together to really change and improve the ag energy nexus. Thank you so much for joining today. Bye-bye.